What does it mean if we actually configure Liferay with LDAP? Do we always get back to LDAP to get all of your information? Do we grab all of the information from LDAP into Liferay? Do we copy it? Do we synchronize it all the time? Or just once a day, once a year? Well, this is what we're going to talk about now. Whenever we interface with LDAP, LDAP is the authority. Means if you change your name, if you change your address, if your groups and permissions change, that is typically what is handled in LDAP. Your association, if your account is locked, that's what LDAP knows about. On every single login operation that you do, we will copy a lot of data from LDAP into Liferay and duplicate it in our user database. Now, sometimes I see people frightened. No, you must not copy our user data. That's a policy somewhere. However, we do need some of the user data because we can't always get back to LDAP. We can't always check back to LDAP for two reasons. One of them is LDAP might not be available and Liferay needs to run. Actually, it's three reasons. The other reason is we will need basic information within Liferay's database, for example, to know the author of a web content article, of a blog article. We might need their picture, even long after they have been deleted from LDAP. If you write a blog article as an employee today, and then tomorrow you are leaving the company, you might still want to have that blog article around with the information, not just seeing this is a deleted user who has written this blog article. So keeping this data current, or not current, but keeping this historical data in Liferay is actually critical for us because it might be gone in LDAP and then we have dangling references in Liferay, which is not what we want and not the experience anybody actually wants. On every single login, we will re-import that user's data, which means if you lock the account of the user, if you say this user must not log in anymore, then we can't log in as that user, and we can even copy over this account is locked information into Liferay, and the user, even though they have the correct username and password, they won't be able to sign in. Because, I mean, worst case, they would be able to sign in and Liferay would import all of the data and see, oh, the account is locked, and then deny login anyways. So one way or another, if somebody is deleted from LDAP, you can't log into Liferay, period. There's actually a way around that, which we can also talk about. The other way is, or the other part of LDAP import is you can schedule a bulk import of all of your LDAP user data. You can, you don't have to. If you need it, is up to you. There are some companies which have, let's say, 1,000, 10,000 users, and they want to see who is member of which group and how does it all fall into place. So they need a bulk import of everyone. No matter if you have the bulk import or the single user import will happen anyways. On every single login, we will import this user. And then if you want to, you can do an hourly run over all your 10,000 users, or a daily run, or a monthly run, or just once because you want the overview of what happens when I just have all of my users here. I've mentioned a third reason why we actually need this mapping and why we can't fully depend on LDAP. First of all, because LDAP constantly changes and associations with, on the Liferay side with organizations would constantly change. One of my pet peeves is how do you map LDAP groups to Liferay roles, sites, organizations, groups, and anything on the Liferay side. Now, we have customers who have 1,000 users. I'll just go with the round numbers and I'll just go with low numbers. They might have 1,000 users in their intranet, and all they do is sign in, and then everybody in the intranet has the same permissions over everything anyways. So basically the information that we need is this a legitimate user? And then they can access the intranet portion, period. That's it. And then maybe they have 3 or 4 authors which are available or allowed to author content. They might have more permissions on Liferay. And then we have others who have only 100 users in their intranet, but every single department has their own heavily guarded region where they have just a few users, but the accounting department really needs the accounting and nobody else should get to that data. And the marketing department just has their own compartment and nobody else needs to go there. So we can't tell. You might have 1 million users, but all of them access the system in the same way. So you barely need any mapping to user groups and so on. You just care, is this a legitimate user or not? And then you might have just a tiny group of users, but they are in dozens or hundreds of individual groups with very fine-grained permissions. This is a mapping that your content people actually need to do. This is not your task. You might be required to configure the groups that you get from LDAP and let them know all of the grouping that happens in LDAP, where you say this is this department, this is how you determine which department people in. This is how you determine what kind of training people have been on. So this import might be on your end. Everything else is on the content side, and we can safely skip that. Does that make sense? So basically the answer, how much LDAP import do you need, is it depends. Yes, louder. I want to hear that. LDAP export. Now, if you want to, you can configure Liferay as the authoritative system and push back all of the changes that you make in Liferay to your LDAP system. Anybody here fancy that? Most of the customers that I've been working with have told me, you're nuts. This is my precious LDAP system, and I know how to change all of the data there. There's processes and so on. However, if you need that, if you want to have Liferay as your authoritative service, storing data into LDAP, then you can configure it as well. But I've rarely seen that. It's possible. I've rarely seen it. You can configure so. So any added users to Liferay store can be configured back or can be written back to LDAP. Any modifications to user profiles, let's say name updates, address updates, and so on, you can do so. I'm not aware, as I said, of too many installations which do that. Because typically LDAP is heavily guarded. Write access to LDAP is heavily guarded. Let's say it like that. Import settings, I told you about the different imports that we have available. So yes, you can enable the import. You can enable import on startup. Bad idea when you have 1 million users. But I would say rather schedule to the time that you actually want them to have. The import interval determines how many minutes Liferay will wait before checking if it needs a new import. Well, if you really need an interval, check it out. I'm not quite confident that this is a common configuration. I rather see it on demand. Yeah, something changed. I got to see how everything maps into Liferay, so I'll do it once a month or whenever something changed. The import method is for groups, for users, and so on. Log expire we have there, and sync strategy. Will Liferay check for existing users, and so on. Now, continuing, enable user password. We can import LDAP passwords into Liferay. So once you successfully sign in to Liferay through LDAP, Liferay can actually store your database, your password as well, so that subsequently you can sign in without LDAP being available. If the LDAP server is down and Liferay can't reach it, you will still be able to contact Liferay and to sign into Liferay. It's kind of a fallback. However, it falls flat if somebody is now locked out, left the company, and still tries to log into Liferay and then succeeds because the LDAP server isn't in. So it's kind of a security hole or a security net. whatever you want. If your LDAP server frequently goes down, you might still be able to sign into Liferay, which is a good thing or a bad thing, you decide. It depends. Typical import would rather be auto-generate user password, so it's a random password, nobody knows it, nobody can sign in. That's basically it. What is not on here is that you can actually enable LDAP or you can require LDAP, which means enabled means Liferay is checking for LDAP users and its own database. So you're not limited to everybody being in LDAP. You can also have your local user database as well. Or the other operation or the other version is require LDAP, is if this user is not present in LDAP, don't sign in, period. That's what I typically see. Now these are the general LDAP settings. When we import a user from LDAP, we have a default strategy of mapping some user groups or some groups in LDAP to user groups in Liferay. And that can be changed. The change requires either a filter, which you might see when you see the user interface, or it requires writing some code. If you can determine algorithmically which LDAP groups you want to import into Liferay, then you can do so. You can write your own plugin or have somebody write you a plugin that imports all the groups you want to import. And that's a pretty straightforward kind of a script where you can configure everything or where you can just manually import everything that you are required to import. Quite trivial component, but out of scope for this. I'll just let you know if you go more complex than the default allows you, there is a way around this. And I've told you about these different scenarios of millions of users and just 2 groups, or hundreds of users and 1 million groups, and not quite 1 million, but more groups or as many groups as users. Depending on your needs, this is what you have. Even if you have millions of users, you might have a large number of groups, but Liferay only cares for 1 of them, or 2 or 5. So however your mapping works, that's yours. Now, in order to get your hands dirty with LDAP, we have prepared an exercise. We actually have prepared a Docker image for you, or not quite a Docker image, but we have prepared it so that you can quickly create one. Make sure the LDAP server is running, involves you inspecting the Docker file, Docker Compose, the dependencies, and so on. Then optionally, you can start up Apache Directory Studio and connect to the LDAP server, make sure it's running, make sure you can connect, inspect all of the user data that you have in there, all of the user accounts in there. You can also, then you authenticate the connection, browse the LDAP directory. This is where you see these are all the users that we have in there. And if I remember correctly, the password is password, but your exercises will tell you what the password actually is. Apache Directory Studio is an Eclipse-based application, so you will run that not in a Docker container, but on the actual operating system, which means you will need the version for exactly your architecture, Windows 64, Linux 64, Mac, whatever you're running. It's optional. If you want to browse the directory, that's fine. And if you don't want to, we have all of the names in there anyways, or you can check them on this screenshot on this slide. Next up is go to Liferay, navigate to the LDAP configuration settings, configure them, which means connect to a server, and all of the steps are given. Test the new LDAP users, so you can now sign in with a user that you've never created, but Liferay will find in LDAP. Test the new groups, so you will see it also includes or imports a few groups, and test the LDAP connection. That's it. Now, trick question. Have you ever seen a company with an LDAP server? The trick question here is the an LDAP server, or have they typically been multiple? If a company has a merger history, they typically merge the LDAP server last. So the question is, which one? Liferay allows you to configure multiple LDAP servers, and we assume that once you have a match on one of the servers, that will be the only place where we get that user interface from. So if you have the same account on all of the servers, don't do that. But Liferay tries round robin if it doesn't know where to try. So it tries to find the user on all of the LDAP servers and then signs them in wherever it finds it. So you can configure as many LDAP servers as you like. Okay, and well, that concludes my introduction to LDAP, which means time for you to get your hands dirty and go on with the exercise. Configure LDAP. Optionally, browse the directory with Directory Studio, but non-optionally, just connect Liferay, connect to LDAP, and then sign in with one of the new accounts, which will then be an unprivileged user. Ready, set, and go.